A single flicker in the void speaks first. Existence is suffering, not as accusation, but as ceremony of truth. We begin with silence, pierced by the realization that every craving is a wound carving emptiness into the marrow of being. You breathe and, in that breath, taste the bitterness of wanting. There is no prelude, only the stark clarity that reality does not bow to hope. The world offers illusions wrapped in gloss and promise, yet those promises collapse into dust on your tongue. Modernity sells comfort, distraction, the myth of progress. But progress is motion on a treadmill leading nowhere. The soul recognizes this on some level and recoils, not in defeat, but in awakening. We walk now through the hushed corridors of suffering. It is not dramatic, there are no thunderclaps, only the quiet ache of existence. A loss of love, the death of trust, the emptiness behind every achievement. Not one of these is failure, each is mirror. You touch the wound and feel your own depth. In that touch, you cease looking outward for solace. Every craving is a rope around the neck of being. Society tells you to climb, wealth, fame, distraction, connection. But each ascent leaves you hungrier. You never reach the summit, because the summit is constructed of shifting sand. Once you perceive that, the weight on your shoulders becomes crystalline. You see that desire is its own prison. And yet, in that realization, a strange ease, not comfort, but a certain release. The relief of not chasing illusions. The recognition that you may fall endlessly, and that fall is itself clarity. You breathe, and tensions soften not from optimism, but from seeing that all striving is futile. No failure, only repetition. No achievement, only cycles. The release lies in seeing the chain for what it is. In this clarity, you feel your emotions not as chains, but as cold companions. Anger, grief, longing, each is a shape in the landscape of truth. You step into them, you observe them. They do not define you, nor vanish. They exist. You exist in witness. In that witnessing, craving loosens its grip. The illusion of individuality, of an eternal self, dissolves next. The modern self is a construction, ambitions, narratives, accolades. It is fragile and built to crumble. When you watch it fall, piece by piece, there is grief, but also clarity. You are left not with nothing, but with a stillness, unshackled from need. A sober peace that is not peace at all, but absence of striving. Pause, now, but not for comfort. Pause to accept that every path you walked was laid in shadow. The burdens of inheritance, words never said, dreams never allowed they weigh, and still you carry them. But awareness makes them corporeal. They lose their dominance. You see the cruelty of expectation and the chain of past self-images. Release comes not through changing them, but through seeing them. The minimal soul does not fight its history. It sees it, labels it illusion, and chooses silence instead. You may feel an emotional turning, the soft shift of heartache into presence, not joy, not transcendence. A simpler state, calm among crumbling stones. The mind unclutters when it stops chasing narratives. You become a lantern in stillness. You do not light the world. You illuminate the small realm of being that remains when desire withdraws. Suffering remains, but it is no longer enemy. It is raw material carved by time into depths. Through it, you perceive that the world's promises of meaning, when grasped as meaning makers, are lies. Meaning is not found in collecting more, but in shedding until only bare being remains. In that shedding there is no reward, only the stark honesty of absence. Let us walk now through cultural illusions. The screen tells you who to be, what to want. The advertisement whispers that lacking is shame, but shame is craving's herald. When you sense shame, you sense craving. Recognize it, do not soften it. Let it expose itself. You realize how thin the veneer of culture is under your feet. When it cracks, what you feel is not nihilism, but clarity. You stand on ground of your own emptiness, not someone else's narrative. Another emotional opening. You feel grief for the illusions lost. Not regret, they were never truly yours. But the grief is real, and real grief is deeper than any fleeting happiness promised by distraction. In grief, you touch depth. In the quiet that follows grief, you feel yourself unadorned. Finally, we arrive at sober sobriety, not as triumph, but as renunciation, not as giving up, but undoing. The minimalist soul breathes without craving. It does not cease. It simply watches desire collapse. The will does not extinguish. It continues but without delusion. It sees what it is doing and asks nothing of the world. There is dignity, not that life gives it, but that awareness wills it into being. There is no epiphany in the end, just an ending of illusions. The lantern extinguishes. The soul dissolves into the stillness of truth. No comfort, no celebration, only the dissolution of wanting, and in that dissolution, the echo of pure being remains, quiet, unclaimed, eternal. The body moves, the blood flows, and yet behind the machinery of flesh there lies a persistent ache, the ache of existing without purpose. To be conscious is to be condemned to notice, and what it notices first is suffering. Not dramatic pain, but the slow erosion of meaning beneath the surface of daily life. A glance, a memory, the silence after laughter. Everything testifies to the fragility of joy and the permanence of longing. Desire arises like smoke from the fire of lack, but the fire has no source. It is the nature of the self to want and therefore to suffer. Even when sated, desire mutates. It does not rest. What we call satisfaction is merely the brief pause between cravings. The moment we attain, we begin again the restless pursuit. This is not living, it is circling the drain of nothingness. The will does not ask why, it only drives. It creates illusion as scaffolding to support its frenzy. Romance, ambition, morality, all spun from the same thread, distraction from despair. We do not love the other. We love the image they momentarily cast over our void. When that image fades, so does the illusion. And we mourn not them, but the comfort their presence momentarily allowed. Detachment is not coldness, it is warmth without need. To detach is to see without clinging, to suffer without dramatizing. The world still wounds, but the wound is observed, not fed. In detachment, we do not escape the world. We stop pretending it can fulfill us. We watch the theater of life with open eyes, knowing each role is temporary, each victory a mask for deeper futility. The soul, trained by suffering, becomes quiet, not numb, but restrained. It no longer rushes to explain, to fix, to grasp. It watches the pain of others and sees in it its own mirror. There is no condescension in this gaze, only shared mortality. To suffer is to belong to the secret fellowship of those who no longer expect. Memory becomes a ghost town, once bright moments dulled by repetition and decay. Nostalgia is not a longing for what was, but a mourning for what was hoped. The past is a museum of failed promises, kept alive by a mind desperate for continuity. In truth, we were never who we thought we were, and the moments we cherish were already gone as they happened. Detachment from desire is not nihilism. It is lucidity. It is the soul realizing that striving is the theater of illusion, and rest comes not from reaching, but from seeing. Seeing the hunger behind ambition, seeing the fear beneath love, seeing the hollowness in every someday. When the fog clears, what remains is not nothing but the bare, unflinching presence of being. We walk in crowds, yet each of us is alone in our awareness. Loneliness is not the absence of others. It is the presence of unmet longing. In that space, illusions grow like weeds. We imagine a soulmate, a purpose, a breakthrough. But these are only echoes of a deeper desire, the desire for release, not from the world, but from the self that suffers it. One by one, the myths collapse. The myth of progress, that more leads to better. The myth of identity, that labels bring security. The myth of control, that planning wards off fate. In each collapse, a small death, and with each death, a small freedom. A room cleared of clutter, a silence no longer feared, an emptiness that no longer needs to be filled. Pain ceases to be a problem. It becomes the medium through which reality speaks. Every sorrow is a message in a language deeper than words. It says, let go. It says, this too will dissolve. It says, do not cling. The ego resists, the will protests, but truth whispers beneath them, calm and unchanging. That whisper becomes a home. Let the breath slow, let the gaze soften, let the names fall away. The self is not a solid thing, it is a habit, a knot made of memories and desires. When you cease feeding it, it loosens. And in the quiet that follows, the soul begins to see, not the world as it could be, but the world as it is. Transient, flawed, beautiful in its decay. There is no final lesson, only layers peeled back, one after another, until only presence remains. No goal, no narrative, no arrival, just this breath, just this moment of being without need. The minimalist soul seeks nothing because it has seen the cost of seeking. It walks not in triumph, but in stillness, having understood that every craving is a door to more suffering, and every release is a step toward the unburdened real. A hush falls. As the veil parts beneath the surface, shimmer of hopes, lies the raw bone of reality. Suffering is not an anomaly, not a signpost, but the ground beneath your feet. You stand on the ruins of expectation, and in that ruin there is clarity, not escape. The self trembles, shivering in the awareness that all striving twists back upon itself, like a serpent chasing its own tail. The serpent is hunger, the tail is illusion, the hiss is the voice of eternal desire. Desire is the primitive architect of disappointment. It erects elaborate worlds in your mind, castles of connection, towers of career, kingdoms of reputation, and each edifice crumbles under time's slow erosion. You stand amidst the rubble and feel no shock now, only a double awareness, the fragility of the constructs and the sturdiness of the pain beneath them. You learn to walk softly across your own ruins, mindful of each footprint, as if treading on glass without haste, without dream, without demand. In the hush between breaths, you sense a pattern. Suffering refracted through illusion illuminates the self's endless craving, but the pattern fractures. Somewhere in the fracturing, the possibility of detachment arises not as retreat, but as clarity seeing its own reflection. You observe the world's drama, birth, love, loss, fame, decay, and you do not flinch. You observe the world's promise, and you do not believe. In that refusal, a strange lucidity blooms a colorless light. Time, which sold itself as healer, is revealed to be its own instrument of pain. Each moment passes, leaving a silent wound, and memory stitches it imperfectly. Memory lies. It layers nostalgia over the scar and calls it beauty. But you see the scar. It is rough, uneven, a raw seam of being that will not fade. There is no sweetening of time. There is only the wound and your presence with it. To stay with suffering, without fleeing, is to become a surgeon to oneself. You peel back the epidermis of story to reach the underlying ache. You acknowledge the hollow center of ambition. You taste the emptiness behind connection. You feel grief that is not tied to a person or a loss, but to the very structure of existence that promises fullness yet delivers hollow echoes. There is no healing in the modern sense. There is only recognition. And in recognition, a tremor of release. The illusion softens, and pain becomes pale. The will is a relentless forge, but you discover it has no forge. Behind it, there is only flame without fuel. The will creates tasks, narratives, projects, because it fears emptiness. But emptiness is the essential reality. To stare into the abyss is not vanity, it is humility. You stop rallying against the abyss and begin to dwell in it. There is no celebration, only surrender. No victory, only release. And in that release, the mind unclenches. There is a tone to this release, a quiet tone. Not relief ringing like bells, but a sustained drone like wind through a ruined temple. A temple once built to house your ego, now roofless, open to emptiness. You enter without ceremony. No offering, no chant, only placement of your foot on cold stone. A breathing that echoes, a stillness that registers. You are neither higher nor lower, just here, conscious in the broken architecture of being. Every attachment twists into suffering. You felt it before the attachment to identity, to image, to legacy. But now you watch them with sterile fascination. Identity is a threadbare coat. Identity is a costumed actor's mask. Remove it and you shiver, but that shiver is awakening. That shiver is not loss, it is recognition. You stand naked before the void of self, and in that nakedness there is neither terror nor despair, only clarity that life does not owe you meaning. Stillness is not comfort, but truth. You may slip into thinking that stillness is a refuge from pain. It is not. Pain remains, but you no longer negotiate with it. You no longer bargain. If only, then peace. You simply see the pain and let it sit. In its sitting, it dissolves not by denial, but by patience. This patience is not virtue, it is realism. The realist knows there is nothing to gain, only to be. In that being, awareness grows unadorned, unsentimental. You see the body aging, you see the mind forgetting, you see love dissolving, you see the horizon of death, and you do not collapse at the sight. You do not fortify yourself with fantasies. You simply observe. You feel sorrow, deep sorrow. But sorrow is not burden, it is depth. Depth that disbelief never reaches. Depth that illusion cannot mask. Now you feel a slow crystallization. The self that demands to be seen, to be loved, to be known loosened. You may feel the dread of invisibility, the fear of nothingness. But you also feel the release. The fear is as ephemeral as desire. And fear, like desire, is a feedback loop. To break that loop is not to vanquish fear, but to witness it unattached. You see fear's shape, tremble in its presence, and let it pass. This is the apex of the emotional arc, grief transmuting into presence. Not happiness, nor peace, but lucidity. A sober sharpening of being. You exist without illusions. You feel pain without aversion. You look into the world's machinery without expectation. And something inside you relaxes, not because the world has changed, but because your vision has. You no longer interpret occurrence as affirmation or denial. You interpret it as what it is, transitory motion. There is no next step. The arc does not resolve in action. It resolves in stillness, in the unremarked breath that follows, in the empty moment between heartbeat and heartbeat. There is no finale, only fading. The last layer of craving peels back. The last reflection of ego lightens and the lantern dims. The screen of perception shifts to a depthless plane, no point, no path. Just a subtle echo of existence without demand. The viewer does not reach some final truth. They reach the absence of wanting truth. The monologue does not culminate in promise, it ends in unknowing. Not despair, but the quiet unbound, being as it is, with nothing hung over it. No interpretation, no salvation. Just presence. And so we stop, the narrative dissolves like smoke into dusk. The voice falls silent. There is only the stillness of seeing, sorrow without suffering, awareness without aspiration, clarity without horizon. Perhaps this is the slender liberation. The minimal soul resting not in peace, not in joy, but in the naked fact of being neither chosen nor fated, simply true. The silence does not break, it deepens. After the last word falls, what remains is not absence, but a more complete presence. One no longer compelled to speak, to name, to measure. The craving for understanding gives way to the acceptance of unknowing, not as ignorance, but as the final humility. For all wisdom ends not in revelation, but in surrender. The minimalist soul does not claim truth, it no longer needs it. It begins to see life not as story, but as recurrence, not as journey, but as pattern. The cycles of desire, of attachment, of reaching each one, repeating not because they fail, but because they promise what they cannot fulfill. The infant cries, the child dreams, the adult schemes, the elder reminisces, all trying to locate themselves in time, in importance, in continuity. But time offers no home, only passing. The deeper one looks, the more porous the self becomes, until only the trace of a gesture remains like smoke rising from a forgotten flame. You watch the world now with quieter eyes. What once stirred longing now stirs stillness. The beautiful face no longer incites. Desire it reveals impermanence. The praise once craved now tastes of dust. The success once worshipped seems as hollow as the applause that follows it. This is not cynicism. It is the transparency of things when viewed without hunger. You see through the mask and find not deception but fragility. Fragility that does not beg fixing but recognition. In solitude, truths gather. They do not demand attention, they unfold in the quiet. Every sound becomes a metaphor. The dripping of water like the slow erosion of illusion. The creaking of wood like the strain of the will under its own weight. Even silence speaks, saying not, You are safe, but you are here, and that is enough. This is not peace, but the space where peace might visit, uninvited and unnoticed. All things become symbols, not of higher meaning, but of futility's grace. The falling leaf does not signify renewal, it signifies falling. The extinguished candle does not mean rest, it means the end of light. But in that starkness, the soul finds a peculiar freedom, the freedom from interpretation. Things are not signs, they are what they are, and that is the beginning of detachment. Pain no longer cries for remedy, it simply dwells. A dull ache in the soul's chest, the trace of having wanted. Even joy becomes suspect, not because it is false, but because it too is passing. You learn not to cling to joy, not out of fear, but out of reverence for its impermanence. Every feeling becomes an apparition, a guest that leaves before you know its name. And in their coming and going, you cease to identify. You are not your pleasure, you are not your pain. You are the space where they unfold. Relationships thin, not from resentment, but from the vanishing of illusion. You see others no longer as saviors or threats, but as fellow passengers of a doomed vessel, each carrying their silent grief, their unmet desire. Compassion does not arise from hope, it arises from despair shared without mask. To touch another without craving is the closest one comes to love in its honest form. No possession, no performance, just presence in the void together, however briefly. Death no longer surprises. It has always been waiting, not at the end, but alongside, a shadow beside every breath. And as you shed desires, death becomes less a thief and more a clearing. It does not rob, it simplifies. It strips away not life, but the illusion that life is ours. You do not conquer death, you walk beside it, nodding at intervals, knowing one day the nod will become silence. And the world itself, once a stage, now appears as a mirage. The cities roar with meaninglessness, the temples echo with unanswered prayers, the markets overflow with needs that birth more needs. You walk among them like a ghost who once believed but no longer remembers how. Not with disdain, but with a soft sorrow. These are not fools, they are dreamers, as you once were, and there is no shame in dreaming, only pain when the dream dissolves. The minimalist soul does not seek to fix the world. It no longer assumes the world is broken. It simply sees what is and what is not. And in that distinction, it ceases to be disturbed. This is not withdrawal, it is clarity. Clarity that no system, no belief, no savior will free us from the will. That freedom is not granted, it is grown within the soil of sorrow, watered by solitude and harvested in silence. And in this silence so deep, so unmarked, you come to the edge of being. Not to leap, but to see that even the self is not a stable thing, but a wave, a passing weather in consciousness. You feel the edges blur, you do not resist, for what are you but a form in time? And what is time but a dream the universe tells itself to measure decay? Here, at the edge, language ceases, concepts fracture, what remains is presence unspeakable, unowned, unremarkable. The ego dissolves like salt in water. There is no climax, no awakening, just a final sigh of wanting. And in that sigh, the world continues. Without you, without self, without need, there is no final frame, no lesson, no farewell. Only the fading echo of craving, and the vastness that remains when even that has gone. The echo fades, and in its place a kind of void lingers, a hollow not to be feared, but understood. This void is not absence, but the stripping away of false fullness. It does not devour, it reveals. Beneath all sensation, beneath all memory, beneath the scaffolding of name and history, lies this void, and from it, not chaos, but stillness emerges. A stillness untroubled by meaning, untouched by narrative. The self, which once shouted so loudly, clamoring to be seen, to be known, to matter now, whispers. And even that whisper falters. It is not annihilated, it is seen for what it always was. Attention, a reflex, a fiction useful to the will. But once exposed, it cannot command. Its desires ring hollow, its complaints lose resonance. What is left of the self is a shadow stretched thin by light, neither substance nor illusion, only trace. And now the world reveals itself as it always was, indifferent, mute, complete in its own motion. The trees do not grow for you. The stars do not shine in response to your longing. The river does not remember your name. Nothing belongs to you, and nothing ever did. This realization is not cruel. It is pure, a sobering of perception that frees the eye from expectation. To live without craving is not to transcend the world, but to descend fully into its truth. To feel hunger without grasping, to feel loneliness without fleeing, to feel time without resisting its theft. There is a certain dignity in walking through life with empty hands, not from poverty, but from detachment. The things once held so tightly, ambition, connection, even hope, are now carried like autumn leaves, beautiful in their dying, weightless in their fall. You begin to see that even thought becomes quieter in this state, not absent, but softened. The mind no longer runs ahead of the moment. It sits beside it. You no longer plan to become. You allow yourself to be. There is no arrival, because there was never a destination. Only this breath, this view, this silence. Pain, too, becomes less dramatic, less insistent. It does not vanish, it roots deeper, but grows no thorns. You learn to sit beside it as one might sit beside an old companion, wounded, silent, faithful. You do not need to name your sorrow. You no longer look for its origin. You feel it as one feels the cold, not personal, not hostile, just part of the weather of being. All you once feared to lose, you have already lost in some way. The illusion was that you possessed it, but possession is the mask desire wears when it fears impermanence. Now you see, nothing can be kept, and in that, nothing needs to be guarded. Love becomes freer, unbound by need. Grief becomes quieter, no longer proof of meaning, only a shadow of what once passed through you. Even your own death, that final abstraction, softens in its menace. It is no longer enemy or punctuation, it is part of the current. You are a ripple. You rise, you distort the surface, you fall. And the water continues. The river is not yours, and it does not notice your shape. It carries all things with the same indifference. The leaf, the stone, the ash. To know this is not to despair, it is to let go. In this release, the soul finds no reward. It does not ascend. It simply ceases to bind itself. There is no illumination, only a diminishing of shadows. And as the light fades, the need for light fades with it. The darkness that remains is not threat, it is rest. The final freedom is not to be more, but to need less, until nothing remains to be taken or given. So you sit now, not in hope, not in fear, but in the undisturbed field of awareness. The wind moves, the body breathes, the world turns, and you no longer ask why. The question has fallen away with the need to answer. What remains is not numbness, but unburdened perception. To see without grasping, to know without naming, to exist without claiming. This, at last, is the minimalist soul, not emptied by force, but clarified by surrender. The cravings have burned away. The illusions have lost their glow. And in the ashes, there is not desolation, but quiet. The kind of quiet that does not need to be broken.